All right, today we're going to finish up the sports store project. Again, ideally, at least, we're going to try next week to see if we can deploy this out to the internet. And starting tomorrow, we're going to be working on this project. I'm working on the database for it right now. I've written the project twice and didn't like it either time, so I'm kind of rewriting it again. Tomorrow, though, we will set up a bunch of controllers. We will set up some views. We're going to not be as clean, so to speak, as the author of our book. And what I mean is, we're not going to have the interface. We're not going to be using Ninject. It would be a good idea to do that, all right? And the author is very wise for doing it that way. What I don't want to have happen is I don't want us to get to a point in this project where we get stuck and nobody can figure out what to do next, including me. So, all right. So in the last chapter, in Chapter 11, it was on administration, and we did add some admin features. But as the author said, anyone who runs the program and knows that they should go into the admin index could go in there and make changes. All right. So we're going to change that in this chapter. So the author says he's going to show you how to prevent random people from using the admin functions by password protecting access to the entire admin controller. There's different ways that this can be done. I'm going to do it his way. All right? His way, just so you know, the way that we're going to do this with forms authentication has basically been deprecated over time. All right? Hopefully you know what deprecated means. In other words, when you create new projects, it's not recommended that you do it this way. All right? But to be honest with you, when we go into our project, we're going to do it in a very similar way to what you're doing in here today. And what you're going to find out is that, for instance, if we don't want anybody to get into the administration controller except, for example, an administrator, then what we do is we decorate, and you've done decorations before with your data annotations, but we put something similar to a data annotation, and if we put it at the beginning of our admin controller and we put the word authorize in there, all right, and then we have to put a few more things in, what we're basically going to tell people is if you're not logged in as an administrator, you're not going to be able to even do anything with this. All right, so again, that's what we're going to be going into today. And the author says once we've reached that point, then the idea is hopefully at least we'll be able to come in and add some pictures. All right, come on, there you go. And yesterday, and I mentioned this to you already, that yesterday I emailed all of you a folder with 9 pictures in it. Those are the ones I'm going to be using. All right, and I know they work. If you decide you don't like them, etc., I'm also going to be giving you pictures probably already tomorrow. And what I want to do tomorrow is I want to go over this project and let you know what I hope we'll be able to do with it. Some of it I've done already. Some of it I haven't done. All right, but I'm just hoping over time that we'll all be able to do this. Okay, so starts with here securing the administration controller. All right, so the author says I have access to the ASP.NET authentication and authorization features, which are packaged along with ASP.NET MVC. Now, the author does this in a few places in the book where there's digging into security features. He's written a series of books, Pro ASP.NET MVC5, but they're different ones. There's one for the client side, there's a platform one, etc. Now, he claims in here that he's making his security chapters available. I don't know if he did or not. All right, I really don't. I didn't see, so you can check that out yourselves if you want to. But as I mentioned to you previously, on the bottom, he says we're going to start by talking about forms authentication. And I'm going to talk about that also, but I want to mention 2 words to you. And that is because sometimes people get them a little confused. All right? If let's assume that you were all going to use the Rankin machines here, all right? And to use the Rankin machines here, let's just say you could all use them, but you all had to log in as student and you all had your own password, as an example, okay? If you did that and you got in successfully, that's the authentication. All right, so when you authenticate, you're making sure that the person has the right to do whatever it is they would like to do. Once you go in and you authenticate, then you authorize. In other words, any one of you can go out to Inside Rankin, all right, and you can see things about you. But my guess is that Devin can't go into Inside Rankin and look up things on Chris, or vice versa. All right? There's even only a certain number of things that I can do in Inside Rankin. As an example, they currently have 2 sections of the class that we have in the morning here, the AWD1111 class. They currently have 2 sections in St. Louis. And I don't have the ability to go and look through their roster to see who's there. The only reason I'd like to do that is I'd like to know if there's anybody who lives out towards Chesterfield or Baldwin or something. Maybe they'd come here next semester because we've got such a small number in that classroom. All right. So I asked Mr. Corrigan, can you do it for me? And he goes, no. And I thought, oh. I said, why? He said, I'm not authorized to do that. He said, I can go and get you a list of people in his class, but we're not authorized. We're not given their addresses and any of that stuff. And I said, well, what do I need to do for that? And he said, Evan can't even give it to you, the instructor. He said, Evan would have to make a request to the main office and tell them what he wanted, because they're the ones who are both authorized to do that and have been authenticated in order to be able to do that. All right. So it says we're going to start out with forms authentication, which is one of the ways that forms can be authenticated. All right. So the author says, first of all, if you take a look, this is the first thing we're going to do. It'll be a bit till we write some code. But first we want to go out to the web.config file, the main one, not the one that's under views, but the main one. And if you look here, under system web, all right, right at the bottom, we want to add this. All right. And what it's going to say is this. We're going to be using a form, basically, for authentication. All right. And the URL is /account/login. It doesn't exist yet. All right, just so you know, that doesn't exist. And the timeout is 2880. And you might say, well, what is that? That's the number of minutes, basically, that the system will keep you up once you log in. That's 48 hours or 2 days. So I'm going to grab these 3 lines of code right here, copy them to the clipboard. All right, go to my sports store, find my web config. That's the one that's should only be, probably is one. That's under my sportsstore.webui. All right, go to my system web, and right before the bottom of it, paste in those lines, the ones right here. Also, just so you know, when you authenticate, you can authenticate in different ways. What do I mean? Let's pretend for a second that the admin controller has 10 different methods in it. If I want all those methods only to be available only to administrators, all 10 of those, then I can put the word authorize, I can decorate it, put it in brackets at the top of the controller. But if it turns out there's maybe 2 or 3 methods that are in there that I want only admin users can use, but there's 5 or 6 that anybody can use, I can do it on a method by method basis. So I can do it on a whole controller basis, or I can do it on a method basis. And that's what the author will talk about in here in just a bit. All right, so it says authentication is set up using the authentication element. I have used the mode attribute to specify we want forms identification. As it says, it's the kind most often used for internet-facing web apps. In ASP.NET 4.51, Microsoft added a wider range of support. It used to be, when I first started teaching this and we did web forms, oh my God, when you wanted to do security, it was not easy. You had to bring in some tools that Microsoft made available to you. And to be honest with you, sometimes you'd follow their exact instructions and they just wouldn't work. All right? It's gotten much better over time. So when the author says the alternatives to form authentication, you could have Windows authentication, where the operating system credentials are used to identify users, and organizational authentication. It says where the user is authenticated using a service like Azure, which we're going to look at next week, which is a cloud-based service. All right? And the stuff that's in here, if we look down toward the bottom of the page here, all right, the author says, again, the login URL tells ASP.NET where to redirect users. So in other words, if I try to do something that I'm not able to do, I'm not logged in as an administrator or whatever, it's telling us where to go. All right, and as it says, it specifies how long a user remains authenticated once they've successfully logged in, and that's 2 days. And that's in the same session, what they're saying. So in other words, if you just kept your machine on, after 2 days, it should time out and either ask you to log in again, which is probably what it would do, or just drop you. All right. The next step, it says, is to tell ASP.NET where it will get details of the application users. The author says he's broken this up into a separate step because he's going to do something you should never, ever, ever do. If you look up on the screen here, there's 2 things in there that are just terrible. All right? The first thing that's terrible is that he's putting a login and a password right inside of web config, and anybody could see it. The second thing that's bad about it is he's got the format set to clear, which means not only can anybody see it, but it is not, it's in clear text. All right, so it's going to come out literally. But what he says is the reason that he is doing this, all right, he says the reason he's doing this is so that he can log in on an as-needed basis and just log in as admin with a password of secret. All right, but of course this is something that you could use during a testing phase that you would never ever use or ever do in an actual production environment. So I'm just going to grab these 3 lines, stick them right in the web config, right below that forms line that we just put in there previously. All right. And you'll notice when we first put it in like this, we didn't have an ending tag. We're going to need one now, so we can put that in between. So this is what your section should look like right here in your web.config. It should be right at the bottom of system.web. Again, I added a regular closing tag here, so it would make an ending forms tag here. All right? And again, this is telling me this is where I want you to have to go to log in. Once you've logged in successfully, this is the maximum time for your session. And I'm even setting up credentials. Clear text, meaning to log in as an administrator, it's just admin, all right, and the password is secret. All right. To be honest with you, there's a lot of places I've worked for that, guess what? You want to guess what their username is? It's admin. They might make a really, really hard to find out password, but they just make it admin because it's easy to do. And I'm not saying they do that. Everybody should do it, or it's the right thing to do. It's just a thing a lot of people do. All right. So that's what he says here. The reason he did this is he wants to keep it simple and focus on the MVC part and not have to worry about doing anything else. All right. So again, the author says, don't do it. Don't do it. And if you are going to do it, don't ever put it in there as plain text as he just did. So don't do that either. All right. So again, MVC framework has a powerful feature called filters. You know what filters are. We're going to be looking at filters some more fairly soon, in that when we come in and we start looking at where statements when you're working with databases. What are you doing then? You're filtering. All right. If I said I wanted in here, let's just say that for some reason I wanted to know everybody in here who was from a certain city. I know I can't find it, but if I asked you, I said, how many people here from here are from Wentzville? All right, I'd be filtering. All right, that's exactly what the author's talking about. Okay, and he says there's different kinds of filters available. You could even create your own custom filters. We would never do that in here. That would be the kind of thing you would do, and probably even more often than you, it would be the kind of thing some kind of a system administrator would set up. All right. In Chapter 18, he will discuss how you can create your own custom filters, just so you see it. All right, so it says the filter that interests me most at the moment is the default authorization feature. So what are we doing? We're going to go to the admin controller, and right before we actually create the class, right under the namespace, we're going to add this. Again, it looks, it looks like a data annotation, and some books call this a decoration. All right, just so you're aware of that. But I'm going to grab that. I'm going to copy it to the clipboard. Go back here. Whoops, not there. Find my admin controller. And right near the beginning of it, right in between the namespace line and the actual line where we create the class, put in authorize right there. All right. Since I put it at the beginning of the controller, that says that no one can have access to this controller unless they're authorized. Again, as it says, when applied without parameters, the authorized attribute grants access to the controller action methods to all authenticated users. This means that if you have been authenticated, you're automatically authorized to use these. And it says it'll work fine for what we're doing, because this is basically a single user type of app. All right, you are not only the developer, you are the administrator. All right. So again, you can apply filters to individual action methods or to the entire controller. When you apply it to the controller, like we just did, it works as though you've applied it to every method individually in the class. All right. So let's see if it works. And how do I know that? I'm just going to do a file save all. I'm going to run the program. And when it comes up, as we tried successfully to do yesterday, I'm going to try to go to /admin/index when this comes up. All right. Now, it worked yesterday before, and if we took that line out, that authorized decoration, it would work again. All right, and notice what it says. Server error, the resource cannot be found. All right, the error, in a way at least, is a little bit cryptic. And it's kind of, I think, meant to be that way, because as far as the system is concerned now, since you have not yet been authenticated, all right, you shouldn't have the right to see what's in here. So as it says here, when you try to access the index action method, the MVC framework detects the authorized filter, and since you have not been authenticated, you are redirected to the URL specified in web config, account/login. Well, we can't go there yet because we have not created an account controller. so that you can't go there, so it's giving us an error. Did you notice this? All right, I'm just asking you the question. Run this again, I should have left it up. But did you notice when we did this, hopefully it'll come up a little faster this time. There we go. All right. It says you requested /account/login. We're getting that error message because it's trying to redirect us to a non-existent page. All right? And that's why we're getting the 404 error, which is page not found. All right? And that's what the system is letting us know. All right. So this is where it gets a little heavy, and there's a little bit of code we have to put in. But as mentioned here towards the top part of page 309, the author says, using the forms authentication feature requires calls to two static methods of the system.web.security forms authentication class. The key word here, if you look up on the screen, is this. We are working in a non-static class, and we're about to call static methods. All right? The author does this his way by, again, trying to use the interface type of mechanism. All right? So what I'm telling you is there's probably other ways of doing it than this, and I don't think we'll go to this extreme in the project that we'll do. All right. So it says we have to call the authentication method to validate the credentials and the set auth cookie method to add a cookie to the response to the browser. So users do not need to authenticate every time they make a request. That would sure be a pain. All right. The problem, as mentioned here, with calling static methods is that you are in an action method. So it says it makes unit testing difficult, if not impossible. All right. The best way to address the problem, he says here, is to decouple the controller from the static methods. This is what we've been doing throughout this project. Anytime you have gone over and put anything into any one of the interfaces that the author has created, you know, I this, I that, all right, anytime we've done that, we've been trying to decouple to make sure that whatever two things have to talk, the connection between them is something else. All right? So it says we want to create a new folder called Abstract under System Web UI Infrastructure. So we're in System Web, at least I am. All right? And I have an infrastructure folder right here. So again, I'm under sportsstore.webui, and I'm under the infrastructure folder. And under the infrastructure folder, I believe we're told to make an abstract folder underneath there. We are. And then a new interface called iAuth Provider. So under this abstract, I'm going to add a class that's called iAuthProvider.cs. All right. Okay. He says the contents of the interface are shown right here. So I believe, let's take a look. That's all we've got. So we've got to come in under the public class line that's here. Okay. We want to make that, oh, you know what? I did it incorrectly. I apologize. I made it a class. I should have made it an interface. That's my error. Let me get rid of this. I'm going to delete it. I apologize. So I'm going to right mouse click on here, choose add. All right. And I'm going to choose new item. And because what I want to add is here, it's an interface, which is under the Visual C# Everybody get that? I apologize for that. All right? Should have known better. iAuth provider.cs. And there it is. Okay? And the author says what we are to do then is to change this or add this line, bool authenticate string username string password. So that will go here. All right. So hopefully at least when you start looking at that, it just makes some sense. And what I mean is what? Well, we're going to have to call a method called authenticate. And what are we going to pass to that method? Somebody's username and their password. All right, that's the way that I would think it would work. So the author says we can now create an implementation of this interface that acts as a wrapper around the static method. Create another new folder in infrastructure called concrete. Do that first. All right, under infrastructure, add new folder, concrete. So again, the abstract folder holds interfaces, the concrete folder holds classes. We want a new class called Forms Auth Provider. Now I can do an add class. All right, Forms Auth Provider.cs, so it'll create that for me. It is a class. Then when I come back to here, the code is on the bottom of page 309, and it goes to the top of 310. And again, I'm just saying that so you know that when I copy this, I'm going to remove everything that's in there, replace it with this, but I'm going to get an error message because it's incomplete right now. All right. All right. So what do we have? Well, already doesn't like something. It's at least giving me it's giving me a warning, but let's just take a look at what's in here. Well, this we've never seen before. Using system.web.security. All right. The other stuff I think you can figure out. All right. We are actually referring in here someplace to the abstract and to the concrete. All right. So we're providing the using statement for one and the namespace for the other. All right. Now this says Forms Authentication Services, this class cannot be inherited. All right, it says show potential fixes. Again, notice, Forms Authentication authenticate string is obsolete. The recommended alternative is to use the membership API, such as membership validate. And he does mention, the author says, you're going to get warnings when you use this telling you that it's been deprecated. But it's one of those things that even though it's been deprecated, people still use it. Okay? All right. And that's where he's got his note about you'll see this, etc. All right. So it says here, the implementation of the authenticate method calls the Forms authentication methods that we talked about earlier. The final step, it says, is to register that in the add bindings method of the ninject resolver class. You may or may not remember that ninject resolver class. So let's go find it. All right. And I believe we have to, I'm going to close the web UI and I'm going to open my domain. All right. And again, I'm looking for the ninject dependency resolver class. And I thought it was there. Maybe it's not. Okay, thank you. All righty. Web UI and in the infrastructure. which I had, but I closed. Under, there we go. Okay, thank you. So it's under the infrastructure, all right? Not under abstract, not under binders, not under concrete, thank you. But it's under the infrastructure. So we've got it opened up here. The changes that you have to make are shown on pages 310 and 311. The first two changes, we have to add those same abstract and concrete that we had before. And you say, we already have those. No, technically we actually do have those. All right? Because they are here and here, but I'm just going to leave them there anyway. I think that we should keep them in there. All right? And then when we come in here, down at the very bottom, we have to add this line of code. This is that binder again. It's the glue, so to speak, that allows things to communicate with one another. So I'm going to grab that kernel line that's down at the very bottom, and I'm going to put it at the very bottom of this. I believe that's outside of it. It's in our last method. There it is. All right. Now, as mentioned previously, the problem we had is the system was attempting to go to the account controller and the login method in the account controller. But we have no account controller. So the next thing that we are to do here, starting on the middle of page 311, is to create an account controller. All right? That account controller will hold our login information. So let's look at what this says first. The next task is to create an account controller and the login action method that we talked about back in the web config file. It says, in fact, we're going to make two versions of this. The first will render the view that contains the login prompt. The other will handle it after you've submitted your credentials. So to get started, as the author oftentimes does, he's created a view model. Remember again what a view model is. All right? And when you use an MVVM, model view, view model, all right? We're taking some of the ability we would normally give to the controller, and we're giving it here to this view model. All right? So it says we've created a view model class that will pass between the controller and the view. Add a new class to the models folder called loginviewmodel.cs. So back to the models folder. Close a couple things that I've got open here. Right mouse click, add class. That class that we are to add is called loginviewmodel.cs. There it is. And we are told then we are to modify that class so that it looks as it does here in figure 12.7 in the middle of page 311. So I'm going to replace everything that's in there with that. All right? And what's in there? Well, it's a model, so it pretty much looks like it's going to be another table, for lack of better things. All right? And actually, that should make some sense, because if I'm going to have a list of users who have the ability to log into the system, I would think I would want that list to be housed someplace. All right, in a database, to me, would seem like a natural place to house it. That said, all right, we're probably going to want to do something to not put in usernames and passwords in clear text. So it says the class contains properties for the username and the password, and it uses the data annotation to show that they're both required. All right, nothing new there. All right. It says given that there's only two properties, you wouldn't have to do it this way. But the author, give this guy credit that one of the things he always attempts to do is to follow best practices. All right, so although he says you could do this without the view model, by just using the view bag, it's considered more of a proper practice to do it the way that he's done it. All right, now we'll create the account controller. All right, so we'll create a new class file under controllers called account controller. All right, so I can close this now. Controllers, add controller. All right, it'll be empty, and it'll be called account controller. All right, we get the normal, typical stuff in here, which again, as you all know, is not very much. All right, so the contents that we're supposed to have are shown on 311 and 312. Again, I'm going to copy this, and then let's go back and take a look at them. So I'm going to replace what's currently in there with what's on pages 311 and then the top part of 312. Okay. So taking it from the top, what do we have? Account controller. Okay. And what do we have in here? Well, here we're creating that interface. And we're saying that the account controller should have that interface passed into it. Now, it doesn't like this, so I want to look and see what it says. Inconsistent accessibility parameter type, IAuth provider, is less accessible than method account controller dot account controller auth provider. So it doesn't like it. All right. Well, and that's red, so that's a bad error, meaning that it won't be fixed. All right. Now, it is possible it will be fixed when we add additional code in. So I'm going to leave it where it is for right now. And the next thing that we are told to do on the bottom half of page 312 here is to create the view. All right. So it says create the views account folder for SportsScore Web UI, and then right mouse click and choose MVC5 View Page Razor. So in other words, since we did empty, when we go in here under views, we do have account, so we do have that. All right. And we're supposed to go in there, right mouse click, choose add, and choose MVC5 View Page Razor. Right there. From the menu, it says set the name to login and click OK. All right. And this is what we get. I don't like the way that looks because it looks nothing like what's on page 312 and 313 in the book. So I'm just going to immediately come in and remove all that. Grab from the book here on the bottom of 312. Well, it says what? This is our login page. The layout it's going to use is our underscore admin layout that we built yesterday. Still giving me that error, which I don't like. I've got a feeling something's not going to work right. But before I try anything, I'm going to do a file, save all, and I'm going to do a build, rebuild solution. I have no idea if that'll fix anything. Maybe I should have done that first, but it doesn't look like it's doing squat. So. Well, that is the good news, is that's the only error I'm getting. The bad news is I'm getting an error. So they're telling us that we should go and try to run this. It's not going to run. It gives me an error, and it's not telling me a lot of information about the error. All right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a break till 1:30, and I'm going to go back and look at my master one, because when I built this the first time, I had no problems with it. So I'm going to see if I can figure out what the problem is while you take a break.